You won't believe what happened to me that night. I was just finishing up the dishes, my hands still wet from rinsing out the last coffee mug, when Carl, my only son, said something that stopped me cold. We've always been close, but that night was different. Unexpected, emotional, and it changed the way I saw him. And myself. But wait, before I tell you what he said, I want to know. From which city are you watching us tonight? Let me know in the comments below. It always warms my heart to hear where this little community of ours is tuning in from. Okay, here's how it all started. It was a quiet Tuesday evening in early October, the kind of night where the wind hums gently against the windows and the house feels like it's exhaling after a long day. I had just finished a modest dinner, roasted chicken thighs, green beans, and mashed potatoes, nothing fancy. Carl had come over after work, looking more tired than usual. He's 28 now, taller than I ever imagined he'd grow. But his eyes still have that same boyish softness I remember from when he used to crawl into bed with me during thunderstorms. We didn't talk much during dinner. He poked at his food, barely touching the chicken. I didn't push. I've learned by now that silence is sometimes the only space a man needs to gather his thoughts. After dinner, I told him to go sit on the couch while I tittied up. The living room was bathed in the soft amber glow from the lamp near the fireplace. He sat hunched forward, elbows on knees, staring at the old photos on the wall. I could tell something was bubbling inside him. I dried my hands and walked over, the hardwood cool beneath my bare feet. I sat beside him, close enough that our shoulders brushed. He didn't flinch. That's when I knew it was serious. "You all right?" I asked gently, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at me, really looked at me, in a way I hadn't seen since he was little. His expression was half ache, half something else I couldn't quite name. "Mom," he finally said, his voice low and careful. "Can I ask you something? Personal?" My heart skipped. "Of course," I replied, though I could already feel my chest tightening. He turned his body slightly, facing me more directly. His hands were clenched together, his knuckles pale. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately," he said. "About how much you gave up for me, for everything." I blinked. I wasn't expecting that. "You were always there," he continued. "School plays, sleepless nights, driving me across town for soccer, even when your back was killing you. You never dated again after Dad left. You just poured everything into me. And now I'm here, grown up, and I wonder if you ever resented that." I didn't know what to say at first. No one had ever asked me that. Not even myself, really. I had just done what mothers do. He went on. "I look at you now, alone in this house, still beautiful, still strong, and I wonder if I took too much from you. If I ever left you with enough of your own life." Tears stung my eyes. I wasn't ready for that kind of honesty. Not from my son. Not tonight. "Carl," I said softly, my voice trembling, "you were never a burden. You were my reason." He shook his head. "I know you say that, and maybe you believe it. But I also know sometimes people don't realize what they've given away until it's gone." There was a long pause between us. The ticking clock above the mantel filled the silence. Then he said it. "I guess what I'm really asking is, are you happy, Mom? Truly? Or are you just pretending for me?" My breath caught in my throat. I felt as if the air had been knocked out of me. All those years, birthdays, scraped knees, lost jobs, late-night talks, and he had finally asked the one question I'd never dared to ask myself. Was I happy? I looked at him, this man who had once fit in my arms like a bundle of blankets, and I saw in his eyes not just concern, but love. A deep, aching love that no one else had ever shown me quite like this. I reached out, placing my hand over his. His grip tightened around mine like he'd been waiting for that touch for years. I don't know if I'm happy, I said, but I do know that you've never stopped making me proud. We sat there, holding hands, not saying anything more for a long time. The firelight flickered across the walls, casting soft golden shadows. I could feel something shifting between us, not in a strange way, but in a deeply human one. A quiet recognition of everything that had passed between mother and son, and everything that still remained unspoken. That night, something cracked open between us. Not broken, just open. And what came next? Well, I never could have seen it coming. That night stayed with me, longer than I expected. After Carl went home, I stood in the kitchen with the lights off, just watching the faint glow of the street lamp spill across the floor. My hand still tingled from where he had held it. Not because of the touch itself, but because of what it meant. He saw me, not just as Mom, not just the woman who cooked and cleaned and showed up, but as a woman, a human being with her own past, her own dreams, her own pain. For days after, his words echoed in my head. Are you truly happy? And the truth was, I didn't know how to answer that. I had spent the last 20 years thinking in to-do lists and grocery items, worrying over bills, and pushing aside my own wants because there simply wasn't time for them. I hadn't thought of happiness as something for me in a very long time. The following Sunday, Carl came over again. He brought Chinese takeout this time, said he didn't want me cooking. I smiled at the gesture, but I could tell there was still more on his mind. We sat on the porch, the autumn air crisp but gentle, the trees whispering around us. I wrapped myself in my shawl, curling into the rocking chair, while Carl leaned on the railing, sipping tea. I've been thinking, he started, keeping his eyes ahead, about what you said last week. I nodded, waiting. And I realized something, he continued. You gave me everything, Mom. And I don't think I ever asked what you wanted. Not just back then, but now. I looked up at him. Carl, I don't regret anything. You were my life's purpose. He turned, looking at me with that same gentle ache in his eyes. But what's your purpose now? I blinked. That question cut even deeper. I don't know, I admitted. I haven't thought about it. There was a long silence between us. Then, carefully, Carl walked over, knelt beside my chair, and took both of my hands in his. I want to know you, he said softly. Not just the mother who raised me. I want to know Isabella, the woman you were before me, the woman you are now. I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. No one's ever asked me that, I said, my voice barely audible. Not in a long time. He smiled, just slightly. Then let me be the first again. We talked for hours after that. About my childhood. My first kiss. The poetry I used to write but never shared. The dreams I gave up when life demanded more practical things. Carl listened with a depth I wasn't used to. Not just hearing me, but absorbing every word. I never knew you loved art, he said. You always supported my interests, but I guess I never thought about where that came from. I laughed, brushing a tear from the corner of my eye. I used to sit on the floor of my bedroom sketching for hours. I wanted to study painting in college, but then your father and I. Well, Life got in the way. Carl's face shifted, like he was realizing he'd only ever known a piece of me. "I want you to start again," he said suddenly. "Painting, drawing, whatever it is. For you, not for anyone else." I smiled, but shook my head. I wouldn't know where to begin. "You begin where you left off," he replied, "and I'll be here, watching, cheering you on." That moment between us, it wasn't just sweet, it was sacred. A turning point. The roles were shifting. I wasn't just the guide anymore. I was being guided too. Later that night, as I walked him to the door, he paused at the threshold. "I meant what I said," he told me. "I don't want to just visit and eat and talk about the weather. I want real time with you. Honest time." I nodded, a warm flutter blooming in my chest. "Next weekend," he added, "I'm staying the night. No distractions. Just us. I want to know more." I wasn't expecting that. Not from a grown man with his own apartment, his own life. But I welcomed it. When I closed the door behind him, I leaned against it and closed my eyes. Carl had opened something in me, and I wasn't ready to shut it again. The week passed slowly. Every hour seemed to stretch, pulled taut with anticipation. I hadn't felt that nervous in years, not since my first date back in high school, when I'd spent hours deciding what earrings to wear and ended up forgetting them altogether. But this wasn't a date. This was my son. And yet it felt like I was preparing for someone new. I dusted parts of the house I hadn't touched in months, rearranged throw pillows, lit candles I'd been saving. I even took out the old wooden sketchbox Carl had no idea I still kept, full of charcoal pencils and dried-up tubes of acrylic. Saturday came. He arrived just after 6 with an overnight bag slung over his shoulder and a bottle of red wine in his hand. "You didn't have to bring anything," I told him. "I wanted to," he said, smiling. "Something simple to mark a new chapter." We cooked together, or rather, I cooked and he kept me company, chopping onions while teasing me for the apron I still wore from his childhood. Best mom ever, it read, faded, and a little stained, but still whole. Dinner was filled with laughter. Not the surface kind we offer strangers, but the kind that bubbles from years of shared memories, burnt holiday meals, broken picture frames from indoor soccer, late-night talks after heartbreaks. After we cleared the plates, I brought out a small album he hadn't seen in years. Inside were photos he probably didn't remember, ones where I was still in the frame. There was one of me at 24, sitting on the floor of our first apartment, painting in the sunlight. He paused at that one. "You looked free," he whispered. I stared at it too, surprised by the look in my own eyes. I hadn't seen her in so long, that younger version of me, still wild in spirit, before the exhaustion settled in. "I think I used to be," I admitted. Carl leaned back against the couch, thoughtful. "You still can be," he said. The wine warmed me, but it wasn't the alcohol that made me feel soft around the edges. It was the honesty. The intimacy of simply being seen. He asked about my past relationships, not out of prying curiosity, but from a place of respect. "After Dad left," he said, "I used to wonder why you never brought anyone else into our life." I took a deep breath. I was scared, I confessed. Not of love, but of losing focus. I didn't want anything to take away from being your mother. He nodded, quiet for a moment. "But now?" "Now," I said slowly, "I wonder if maybe I held myself back too much. Maybe I forgot that I'm allowed to want something more." Carl turned to face me. "You are, and I think you always were." but you didn't have someone to remind you. The clock ticked softly in the background. The room was dim, lit only by the fireplace and the kitchen light we'd forgotten to turn off. Then he did something I didn't expect. He reached over and gently tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, just like I had done to him 1,000 times when he was younger. It was small, almost nothing, but in that moment I felt something stir, a deep tenderness that didn't feel maternal. It felt human. I didn't pull away. We sat like that, inches apart, the silence between us full of meaning neither of us dared to speak aloud. Eventually, he broke the tension. "Would you show me?" he asked. I frowned, confused. "Show you what?" He nodded toward the sketchbox. "Your art. I want to see what you used to create." My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, revealing cracked pastels and faded paper. I hadn't touched them in years, but the feeling came rushing back, the smell of graphite, the soft scrape of pencil on paper. I pulled out an old sketch of a woman's face, unfinished, delicate lines hinting at sorrow. Carl studied it carefully. "She looks lonely," he said. I swallowed hard. She was. He didn't say anything, just looked at me. "I don't want you to be lonely," he said quietly. "Not anymore." And for the first time in a very long time, I let someone truly hold that part of me, the quiet ache I had hidden for decades. We didn't go to sleep right away. We stayed on the couch, talking late into the night, about art, aging, regrets, and the things we still hoped for. And though nothing happened that would raise eyebrows or cross boundaries, something shifted between us in a permanent way. He no longer saw me only as Mom. He saw me as a woman with a life still worth exploring, and I saw him not just as my son, but as someone I could finally share the whole of myself with, openly, vulnerably, without fear. What happened the next morning would change me. Again. I woke early the next morning, the kind of quiet stillness that only exists right before dawn wrapping itself around the house. The sky outside the bedroom window was still blue-gray, barely touched by the sun. For a moment, I didn't move. I just lay there, wrapped in the soft comfort of the old quilt my mother had passed down to me, and listened. There was no sound from the living room. I wondered if Carl was still asleep on the couch, curled up like he used to be when he'd sneak downstairs after a nightmare. Quietly, I stepped out of bed, wrapped my robe around me, and padded down the hall. I found him sitting up, his back to me, gazing out the window at the glowing horizon. He didn't hear me at first, or maybe he did and just didn't turn around. "Couldn't sleep either?" I asked softly. He looked over his shoulder and smiled. "Didn't want to waste the stillness." I walked over and sat beside him again. Our new habit, side by side, shoulder to shoulder. "I kept thinking about last night," he said. "I feel like I saw you for the first time. The real you." His words warmed me, but they also stirred something fragile. I didn't realize how much of myself I had tucked away, I admitted. Not out of shame, just out of habit. Carl turned fully toward me now, his gaze open, steady. "Then maybe it's time to let her out again. All of her. Not just the parts that took care of me." I took a deep breath. "I'm not even sure who that is anymore." He shook his head. "I think she's still right here." We sat like that for a while, not speaking, just watching the sky soften and stretch into morning. The light spilled gently across the floor, and I noticed how peaceful he looked, not burdened by the weight of a difficult conversation, but calmed by it. "I wish I could go back in time," he said after a while, "and tell teenage me to ask you more about yourself, to notice the woman behind the mom." I reached for his hand, not out of comfort this time, but out of connection. "You're doing that now," I whispered. He smiled, lifting my hand and resting it between both of his palms like something precious. It was in that quiet moment, just breath, warmth, and light, that I felt something shift again, a deeper understanding, an even more delicate closeness. He wasn't my little boy anymore. He was a man, and he was looking at me as someone who still mattered beyond motherhood, not for what I could do for him, but for who I was and who I still could become. We spent the rest of the morning slowly. Breakfast, soft music playing from the old speaker in the kitchen, and an unspoken understanding between us. When he packed up his things to leave, I walked him to the door, just like always. But this time, he didn't just hug me. He held me, a long, firm embrace, like he was anchoring me, like he didn't want me to go back into that shell I had so carefully crafted over the years. "You're not alone anymore," he said into my shoulder. "Even when I'm not here." I closed my eyes. "I know." He pulled back and looked at me. "Promise me something." "Anything. Don't disappear again. Let the world see you the way I do now." My throat tightened, but I nodded. After he left, I stood by the window and watched him drive away, sunlight catching on the windshield like a slow spark. I walked back to the living room, still warm with the echo of his presence, and sat on the floor with the sketchbox. This time, I didn't hesitate. I pulled out a blank sheet, picked up the charcoal pencil, and I began to draw. Not the lonely woman I had once been, but the woman I was now, awake, seen, loved, and ready to rediscover herself, not for anyone else, but finally for her.